Today on Talk Retail to Me, we dive into the transformation at one of America's largest family-owned luxury retailers. What started as a straightforward request to clarify roles became a journey of rebuilding trust, transforming leadership behaviors, and healing a deeply fractured organization. Join me as we unpack how authentic leadership, structured processes, and a willingness to admit mistakes turned an organizational crisis into a story of redemption. Today I have with me our CEO, Robert Kaufman, as well as Principal Kathi Toll. And I'll just have you guys introduce yourselves real quick. Ladies first.
So, Tricia said my name's Kathi Toll. I've been with Parker Avery. I'm coming up on 12 or 13 years, so quite a long time. I am the principal for the organizational change practice, which includes people, a lot of people, organizational alignment, communication, learning and development. So delighted to be here. This is an excellent project to reflect back on. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Robert?
Hi there, everyone. Robert Kaufman. I'm the CEO of the Parker Avery Group. I've been with the firm a little bit more than 14 years now. And as Kathi mentioned, we worked together on this very interesting project where my experience and this project overlapped. Was, at least initially, the thought was that there were some needs in the product development area, and there were. But as you'll come to hear in a few moments, it was a much broader need within their merchandising group that we were asked to come in and do some assessing and some recommendations. But I'll hold on that, and we can get started whenever you'd like, Tricia.
And I'm Tricia Gustin. I handle marketing for the Parker Avery Group. So let's jump in. First of all, tell me about the client and the specific challenges that they wanted us to help solve. And then along with that, describe the approach you used.
So we have a relationship with this company, and I have a relationship with this CIO going back, well, let's just say it was before the turn of the millennium, so a little while ago. And so he reached out and said that we are having, meaning this company, who is a luxury retailer, a family-owned luxury retailer, the largest of its kind in the country, actually, that they were having some problems in their product development area around roles and responsibilities, and that there had been a recent reorganization and that things were not going as well as hoped and as planned, and they wanted someone to come in and just take a quick look and see if they could come in and clarify what everyone's roles should be in the go-forward organization. So that was the setup, if you will, of the project. We learned some interesting things once we get started that turned this into far more than just what I described. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Kathi, in terms of the baseline of what we were expected to do when we came in.
I think it was probably within 12 hours upon our arrival, we realized, oh, this is a very different project. This has more complexity than we initially thought. We received a call the evening before about one of their leaders that was released that evening from employment. So that was a little twist we didn't see coming, and we hadn't even been on site yet.
Right. So what we had learned before arriving was, as we mentioned, that there had been a reorganization, and I had now transitioned from talking to the CIO to the leader of what they call their merchandising group. And the reorganization was under his span of control, and honestly was his idea to go ahead and have this occur. And as he was describing to me what had occurred, from his view of the world, there was quite a bit of division within his organization, and in particular in the product development group that this person that Kathi mentioned that was released the day before we got there had created, or at least it was a perception that this person had created an environment that wasn't conducive to partnering within the broader company, and that had led to a bit of dysfunction in the operations within product development. So what we had thought we were walking into was as I described, and we went about our traditional means to really do a discovery and understand from the folks who were impacted what had occurred and what the situation on the ground was.
As we began the conversations, it became quickly apparent that, Tricia, when you talked about we were brought in for some process work and a little bit of org, as we listened to each of the different interviewees, it was less process and a whole lot of organizational issues. And that was one of the early big reveals that there was something amiss, not only within the processes, but how the reorg had even come to be, why the reorg had happened. There was division between the senior leaders on approach. As we continued, people were so candid. They did not hold back a thought, a feeling, an opinion. They were very vocal about how the reorg had been handled, not in a good way, how there was misalignment across the organization, how they were getting mixed messages. And the process was like, oh, yeah, and we kind of have a process, but we do our own thing. So it was very surprising, eye-opening to to quickly kind of recalibrate and go, oh, this is process, but it's also much more, because it was starting at the senior leadership, and the people that were on the receiving end were just absolutely had it. They were like, we want to work, we want to do our best work, we love this company, and we just keep going around in circles.
In my experience, it was the largest feeling of betrayal and lack or loss of trust that I had ever seen in a client situation, which, as we pulled on those threads a little bit and things started to unravel, as Kathi was mentioning, oh, this is a process problem. We'll just define the process, explain what everyone's role is, and move on. Well, it wasn't a traditional role responsibility issue. It was, well, why did this happen? And just for way of background, for reasons that are still a little opaque, the leadership decided to make a fruit basket change. People who are in a given role were told the next day, you're in a different role. You might not be trained for it, but this will be good for you. This will be good for your organization. And were they adequately trained? No. Was it clear what their lines of demarcation of what they were doing was? No. Did they understand the why? No. So a lot of those things happened, but they were given assurances that all those things would get addressed in due time. Well, I think it was 6 months, 9 months when we came in since the reorg had happened, and there was continued dysfunction, continued lack of or miscommunication. And so what had turned from what we thought was a misalignment, and we would come in and, I don't want to say hit the easy button, because these are never easy, but an easier button was, wow, the senior leadership team, according to the folks we were talking to, had lost the trust of the team. And so that's when we also engaged the human resources folks who had an additional ear to what was really going on the ground. And maybe you want to touch on that and the folks that we talked to there, Kathi, which I don't usually find that we're having to go to them as much as we did, but they were an integral part of the success of the project.
For whatever reason, HR had been asked to stand down when it came to announcing the reorganization, communicating. They had been asked to stand down. They were trying to be respectful. In the meantime, though, they're watching while this is going on, and they're as perplexed as the employees, feeling as if they couldn't step in because they would be stepping on toes. It was a lot of little things. For instance, they had a very informal decision-making process. So I might be sitting in the room with Robert, and we have a little chit chat and say, hey, we should start doing this differently. He agrees. We make a little pact and say, we're doing that. And then they would leave, we leave the room, but we didn't tell anybody. And somehow there was this notion in the leadership's head that they were just intuiting. People that were supposed to be responsible were just somehow picking up this information, or somebody surely had told them. They didn't. So that's where either there was the lack of communication or there was a twist put on the communication. So again, they've collectively agreed to a way forward. They go in, they sit with their individual teams and say, this was what we agreed to, but I want you to do something a little different. So you have 3 leaders doing that, 3 different teams of people getting messages. They talk to each other and they were like, I'm confused. Are you confused? So it just perpetuated this cycle. They just devolved into almost like just pure frustration, and were trying to work things out amongst themselves. But then, of course, you always have different points of view. So when we did reach out to HR, they had excellent perspective. They had objectivity. They had watched the whole thing almost from a witness's chair. And once we started to pull them in, it was clear all the way up to the CEO. Nobody clearly had the full grasp of how impactful this had been to the organization. And when it was presented to the CEO, his response was, how did this happen? How did I not know this?
And there was some surveying going on as well, right, Kathi? So it wasn't just word of mouth, which is obviously important, but they actually conducted an employee survey for those that were in this merchandising organization. And the results were, I can't remember how many pages. It was like 17 pages of very, very detailed, candid feedback.
Yes, it was hard to read. As a third party, it was hard to read. As somebody that was a leader in the organization, I can't imagine. It probably took them a couple.
And that was all before we even got there. Those surveys were conducted before we even got there. And then during discovery, this is what was revealed. These
Correct.
issues were revealed from an organizational change that had taken place 6 months prior to us even engaging.
Exactly. Yes.
But what was interesting is that the person, he is an EVP over this group. He's the one who brought us in. He didn't share that feedback with us directly. We didn't know that any such survey had happened. Through these discussions with HR, we built a relationship and understood, or they understood that, by sharing this with us, we weren't going to breach any specific confidentiality of any sort, but we really needed to understand this.
Sure.
And it created a wow moment, not a good wow moment, as Kathi alluded to, but it also put us in a really awkward position because one of the main root causes of the problem was the leader who brought us in. And so that makes it quite challenging to bring constructive, feedback to them. And we weren't shy about it, but we took I'll say a safer path by engaging HR, and then the highest level eventually in HR, the CHRO, who, no surprise, had a very strong relationship with the CEO. And so we started speaking to the CEO, and not in any way to speak poorly of the individual who brought us in, but rather really discussing some of the behaviors that needed to change in order for this to remedy itself. Meaning, you hired us to come in, align your business processes, develop, a RACI, so we know that, someone in role A does these activities in this level of responsibility. And we can and did do that, but that still wasn't going to solve the problem. The problem was larger than that. In terms of that engagement, Kathi was very instrumental in working with the leaders in HR. Not that I don't speak that language, but I'm not fluent. How's that? And Kathi is a people person, and change management leaders, as she is, uh, are very attuned to the same things that these folks in HR were. And so that helped, I would say, expedite
Yeah.
to some recommendations and such, Kathi. But maybe you can kind of talk about that journey a little bit, and how that led to some of the things that we felt needed to be done.
Yes. So it was probably our first, maybe second readout with the leadership team. And we had formed it was like a reset. It's like, we need to go back to the beginning because we needed to have the conversation. You have lost your people's trust. And that's hard. That is a very difficult message. We'd planned a meeting and had written talking points for the leader to very transparently, candidly speak about errors and apologize. And there was some feedback that was like, but we already apologized. Okay, we screwed up. We know that. And it's like, they're not buying it. You're gonna have to really grovel.
Right.
you're you're gonna have some groveling involved
It
here.
was like that scene in Pretty Woman where,
Right.
they brought him back and said, no, you're going to have to do better than that. Right.
Yeah. Yes, because even if you've acknowledged it for whatever reason, we don't read minds, it wasn't taken authentically, or they didn't see credibility in it, and nothing has changed. So first step was literally being able to have the leader ask a room full of people, not his direct reports, but people even underneath his direct reports, and then the others, can I win back your credibility? You could tell terribly disappointed that he'd let the organization down, and he really wanted to, but it was an issue of, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And putting together like a RACI and the processes, that's nice. It's documentation. There's a record of it, but there has to be real life behavior that follows suit in order to make that come to life and turn that into a daily way of working.
And did we help them with that? Is that one of our big deliverables that was sort of unseen, not foreshadowed in the very beginning?
I would say by the time we made it through, and we stayed very close, and one of our colleagues who was doing the process work worked with the subject matter experts as we were documenting the process. Is this correct? We identified where there were misalignments. There weren't really clear roles and responsibilities. So what had happened is, amongst different teams, the strongest voice won. It was kind of like
Right.
the person that spoke the loudest
Mm.
and got their way, which wasn't aligned with what the process should be. So
Sure.
we had to work through. It's like, okay, are you all right if, can you give a little bit on this and let that person take that? So that was part of the issue. And really, it was helping the leadership stick to the straight and narrow and not take steps backward. And every once in a while they would.
Right. The other observation that we had was, as Kathi said, the senior most leader that we were referring to had two primary direct reports that were all, I won't say complicit, but all involved in this organization. Their teams plus the person that was exited right before the project. They, to varying degrees, but mostly not, didn't connect with their folks very well. So, hey, we apologized. It wasn't perceived to be authentic, and I don't think it was because it wasn't, but because it was, my words, more transactional than actually engaging and talking through with folks in small huddles, one-on-ones. That created a problem. And then even later, the most senior person, who, in an interim basis, took the responsibility for the area that the person had been exited. That person had 38 years of experience in this company. And some of the folks that were in this team that was left without a leader were folks with 2, 3, 5 years experience, some a little bit more. And they felt that they knew that area well enough to be able to fly on their own, or at least with limited guidance. And he didn't share that view. And so that made some of the remediation that much harder. And even when we did the scripting and had things for this leader to say, the actions that followed weren't consistent with some of that description and messaging. So that created problems as well. And we had to have very open conversations with the CHRO, the CEO, and this leader about those things. And it created a very difficult decision for the CEO. The CEO respected this person greatly, but was having a conundrum of, do I leave this person in the role, or do I redeploy that person somewhere else, because the business could definitely use this person's vast experience. And we gave our opinion and recommendations there. But how do I say this? For me personally, not being somebody who is deeply involved in some of these change projects, this was one of the hardest projects for me, because I loved when we were talking business process and RACIs, because that's something I feel very comfortable with. Getting comfortable with influencing and getting hard decisions about people's behaviors and whether they're a good fit in an organization, it's very meaningful, work and trying to get that alignment. But boy, for me, it was very taxing and very stressful. And I don't know if you felt the same way, Kathi.
It is exhausting because we had individuals reaching out to us and giving us some feedback on, well, this is what was said to me. And we're hearing it and going, wow, not
Yeah,
appropriate.
we were therapists as well.
Yes. So we were like, we're getting there. It's baby steps. Just stick with it. Most of these people were highly valuable to the organization because it's family owned. There was a real sense of familia within the organization. Interestingly, what had happened, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 weeks after we arrived, is one of the senior members went to a leadership academy. It was an offsite 5 days. Evidently, it's very intensive. And, oftentimes you have senior leaders go to an offsite and they come back and not a whole lot of change. This gentleman went to this leadership academy, took it to heart, came back and was like, he just was like, look, I get it. I understand. I don't love confrontation. I didn't want to deal with what was coming to me. I probably didn't support my people well enough. I didn't stand up to other leadership team members when I should have. We were like, wow. And that shift in the dynamic among the leadership was pivotal to getting the other leader, who had a really strong personality, to kind of step back. Like, you do you, and I'm going to take on my world. As I'm reflecting on it, that had a huge influence because he turned out to be one of the strongest change advocates we had in the organization. And when he apologized to the team, it was so heartfelt. He was so nervous because that's just he's not an outgoing person, and you could tell he took it so personally. We were all in the room like, wow, okay. It was almost like you could tell he was getting a little choked up. So that was a shift that it's like, had he not been able to be that transparent, I'm not sure we could have made that turn as fast as we did, because it was a short project. When you reflect on it, we weren't there months and months. We had a pretty tight mandate, And by the time we got to the actual documentation and the working sessions, we had come light years as far as leadership interacting with their teams, not talking at them, but talking with them and
Yeah.
working things out amongst the teams.
Yeah. So it
Which,
sounded like a lot had happened just in the upfront discovery phase. As you peeled back the onion,
yeah,
there was more and more and more and more and more. So can we move on to so went through the discovery phase, found a lot of hiccups, warts, whatever we want to call them. And so the dynamics of the project changed quite a bit. What were the major outcomes from this project that we delivered to them? What were those major pieces?
the process mapping and the RACI. Then it was we created for them a governance structure. So, all right, 6 months down the road, you reevaluate what's the structure for if and how you make a change to a process. You know, who has to approve it? What are the stage gates, so to speak? We also stayed on maybe 4 weeks after with a bit of a follow-up project and help them with developing competency matrices for their different functions. For instance, if they had a planning function and they had 4 roles in planning, let's say they had an assistant, an associate, a planner, and a senior planner. There was no clear criteria. If I'm an associate, what do I need to do to move to the next level? So we created for a particular function with our strong advocate, because we felt like he would be a really good champion. We created the competency matrices so people could see a clear growth. They had learning and development programs all over the place, internal, external. Their resources were so rich, it was almost like people were paralyzed. They didn't know where to start. So we put together learning paths for, again, some specific roles. We worked with leaving them the governance piece and communication cascading. So it was this very, again, informal kind of flow of communication. And we were like, yeah, at least a couple, 3 times a year, you gotta get the team together and just ensure everybody's on the same page. So those were some additional on top of deliverables we stayed on to help, because it was, and in my experience, 80% of any of our clients' issue is communication. It's just, can you not talk to each other?
Right. Right.
And
And making the time to do so. I mean, we're
yeah,
all, time deprived, and having the understanding, but also taking the action to carve out that critical time to be communicating, maybe town halls, but also to open your door to have people come in when there's a need to have a discussion about a role, question, or whatever it might be, the mentoring. Because as I mentioned, there was quite a gap in this one particular area in terms of experience versus where the leader was. And we helped. The one thing Kathi didn't mention was in the initial part of the project, we put together the existing organization, what it looks like, and then what over time, 6 months, 12 months, it should evolve to look like in terms of titled, boxes, if you will, titles, et cetera, and how that interaction should work. But until they were to fill some of these roles with, we'll call it middle management, these very senior experienced folks were working with folks 20, 30 years their junior. And that's hard, right? Let alone the experience, but we don't need to delve into how boomers and Gen Xers think differently than millennials and Zs, but that's real too. And there was difficulty there. So it was a really interesting project. And I feel like we left them in a really good place. Now, because the leaders were left in their positions, that there's still some continued difficulty there. And I don't say this happily, but you can have all the sustainment things that we built and left them for the HR team to work with them. but there needs to be continued follow up. It's like anything. It's like, diets, right? If you go off your diet, you're going to gain the weight back. And so there's probably some, retrenching, if you will, that occurred, but we surely left them with the tools. And I don't mean to be trite about it, but they can be successful with the right mindset and the adherence to that. And we agreed with them to lightly engage in that second project. They wanted to take it on jointly and then have us kind of wane and they take on more from a changed leadership standpoint. And so as long as they continue to do that, I think success will be in their future.
And I think particularly COVID had been unusual. I mean, it was hard for everybody. For this organization, because they were so accustomed to these water cooler decisions, as I'd call them, passing somebody in the hallway and going, hey, I think we should do this. Do you agree? Okay, good. That disappeared. There were very few people that were in the office on a daily basis, so they were missing any of that communication. But that really had left its mark on people. And the fact that this particular industry is going through its own sea change of just, I mean, this used to be a very standard, sleepy industry. Not a lot changed throughout the years. And there were some now innovations that have hit the scenes over the past 5 to 7 years. Then you throw COVID on top. Now we're going to do this reorganization that was kind of half baked. So it was just a pile-on of all of these different, the perfect storm of like, wow, you couldn't have planned this any you couldn't have done a worse job.
I wanted to ask about what would you say was the most successful part of the project?
As we were wrapping up with our deliverables, we did 3 days of a general session, individual then team sessions, and then we brought everybody back together to review the RACI in detail. Mm-hmm. And that can be an excruciatingly difficult, it's not fun for people. But this group was, they're like, can we just see the RACI? We want to see the RACI. Can we understand the RACI? And I'm like, wow. So we had everybody in the same room. They'd broken off into the groups. And the senior leaders, like one was kneeled down, talking, with his team about like, well, here's what that means versus that. Could this change to somebody that's being consulted? And those little pockets were going on everywhere. And I videotaped it and literally was like, evidence. But it was so gratifying to see them working as a team and not leaders and workers. This was a collective effort of, we want to get this right. We want to move forward.
I would agree 100%. I mean, from that, there was the additional sustainment work that we put in place. So those 3 days weren't just that 3 days. So you add the sustainment things that Kathi had touched on. I think those two together, and I agree, the folks that were feeling the pain the most, by seeing what their responsibilities were, but more importantly, having their leaders engage them directly, answer questions that are not easy questions. Well, I see that this is what I'm supposed to do. I also see that there's a level between me and my boss, and it's clearer now what I need to do to attain that next level. I wouldn't say it was perfect, but it surely erased some of the gray, and it wasn't maybe black and white, but it was much closer to black than it had been. So I think all those things led to the teams that were feeling really horrible, feeling a lot better and rebuilding that trust. We were there for 3 months. Was the trust fully rebuilt? No. You can break the trust more quickly than you can regain the trust. But they were on the road to recovery, and I felt good about that.
You were just really in like kind of deep with the people stuff. Yeah. And I know for Robert, he was like, oh, this is really this is so much harder than I thought.
Right. Yeah. It's surely not the lane that I excel in, but I
Yeah.
learned a lot, and
Yeah.
I think I was more helpful than hurtful. Though it was fun for me to watch Kathi in her element, and also having a counterpart. I don't want to say often, but there are times when we don't have somebody who shares the same really deep belief in the people side of things,
Mm.
and their CHRO
Yeah.
and the person that worked for her really were engaged in this and really experienced. And it was fun to watch the interplay with those two and Kathi, and then with the CEO. It was just very rewarding for me as well.
Yeah, I will say about that company's culture, I got to work with them, as you all know, on a parallel project on the store operations side.
Yeah.
And just the culture of the people that work for that company is really tight. Everybody wants to see the company succeed as well as kind of their own success too, which feeds into the company's success. So I can imagine the RACI meetings, Kathi, when you were telling me about them, like,
Yeah.
nobody jumps up and down about a RACI, but in this case,
No.
they want to see the end game is the end goal is succeeding for the company. So that's, seemed to be why they were invested in it so well.
Oh, I have, and I told them I have never seen a group more excited to see a RACI ever. Normally, we're dragging people into the meetings.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
"Go get
It
your
was
candy."
it
All
was
right.
interesting. Yeah.
Last question to wrap up. There's lots of reorganizations happening all the time in retail, as we know.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for retailers, who maybe just faced a reorg or know that one's about to come? Give me one or two sentences of what they should focus on first.
Well, I'll probably steal some of Kathy's. Communicate. Tell them what you're going to do it. Tell them what you did. I mean, that's a bit trite, but really just make sure that folks understand the reason for the change and how they fit into the new, model. Are they going to all be ecstatic about it? Probably not. But like anything, when people understand why the change is happening and how they fit in, it helps them assimilate to what's coming.
Echoing that is, don't underestimate the importance of why we're doing this, how you individually, team member, will benefit, how the organization will benefit. And you know what? Get your message down and continue to repeat and repeat and repeat. Because, well, we said it in a town hall. That's great. We're all busy. We sent it in an email. We get thousands of emails. You're going to have to repeat yourself as many times as you do if you have raised a teenager. You got to stick to the message and don't assume because you said it a few times people understand. You're going to have to keep coming at it.
Yeah.
Right.
Great advice. All right, Robert and Kathi, thank you so much for joining me again on Talk Retail to Me. Really enjoyed hearing about the project from the front lines as usual, and looking forward to our next episode.
Great.
Sounds great. Thanks for having us. Take care.
That's a wrap for this episode of Talk Retail to Me. If you have questions related to today's topic, please visit our website at parkeravery.com to learn more and to contact us. Also, we'd love it if you shared Talk Retail to Me with any of your colleagues. It's streaming on all the major podcast platforms, and the videos are available on our YouTube channel. For more Parker Avery industry expertise and advice, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.